picture behind me is a sycamore tree. And this sycamore tree is a picture that I took in Jericho, the same place that the setting of our story today with Zacchaeus takes place in. The sycamore tree is one of the oldest species of trees on Earth. 100 million years old. Known for its longevity and hardiness, they last probably about 600 years. This tree, so our guide said, is the tree that Zacchaeus climbed. It can reach as tall as 175 feet. The bark is white and spotted brown. It's not a drought-tolerant tree. It has to be near water. And it's actually gone extinct in Central Europe. It was thought extinct in Israel and Palestine area. But here it is. And buses trek tourists to this tree every year. Underneath the tree is where I bought a Palestinian headscarf for my husband. That's not my husband, it's one of the guys on my trip. You'll meet him at Christmas. But he, if not before, he is exposing to him the value of a headscarf in the hot weather. And it reminds me to tell you that here, Jericho is in Palestinian-occupied territory. So we had to go through a number of checkpoints to get here. Jericho has 20 civilizations buried under it. Let's just think how big a number that is. This is a picture of my professor, Glenn Wooden, pointing out a fortified wall that was built in 8,000 BC. It's claimed to be the oldest fortified city on Earth. It comes from that Neolithic period. Joshua, it says, circled 7 times by the ancient Israelite the walls of Jericho, and they came tumbling down. Also in Jericho are the famous Elisha Springs. And so it shows that the sycamore tree would potentially grow there because there is water. And this is the spring underground, so vitally needed by the communities there for agricultural purposes. So here's our sycamore tree. We have Zacchaeus. In Canada, he might be considered a Revenue Canada agent. Maybe he would be a forensic auditor for our Senate scandal that is going on in our nation's capital. Not a really a guy liked by the masses. One who profits from his collections. He was a Roman Empire employee. And close by here, we find Herod's palace. So if he was a chief collector, he probably was quite wealthy. He's a short man. He can't see past the crowds, so he runs ahead and climbs the tree, looks around, sees Jesus, and Jesus walking by looks up to him and says, "Come on down. I'm going to your house for dinner." Well, he comes down and he's overjoyed, and the crowd around him is grumbling. Why is Jesus going there? And again, Jesus confounds us, deciding to have dinner with sinners or outcasts. And the grumbling crowd says, "This is not good." Then Zacchaeus shouts out, but I give half of my income to the poor. And if I'm caught cheating, I pay it back fourfold. at the verbs in this saying that he says here. We've always assumed that it was, I will give half of my earnings to the poor. But the New Revised Standard Version actually says it's not a will, future, a will give, but it is I give. Now, the second part of the sentence, whereas if I'm caught cheating, I wouldn't pay back. If I have defrauded, some people say, I will give back four. So if I'm caught making a mistake, I'll pay back fourfold. But it makes a big difference in how we look at this passage, because Zacchaeus has always been considered a sinner redeemed. But if Jesus says to the crowd around who's grumbling, this is the son of Abraham, he restores him within the sight of the crowd. And the verbs actually take the spotlight off Zacchaeus and puts the spotlight on the issue with regards to the crowd, creating outcasts. So it is the masses, because he just might be doing his job. It's like how we might treat collection agents. Or sometimes I've heard people talk about our police services this way. Jesus sits at the table with sinners and outcasts, turning over social expectations, but rather than being defiled by, he brings wholeness and welcome. It's a shock. Last year, Stephen just said that this is how you were introduced to me by YouTube. This is my graduate project. And I gave it to Connie. Thank you, Connie, for reading. And Lynn, I'll give it to you after the service. Our finance committee. It's called Where's the Money? What do United Church members, leaders experience when they become victims of financial irregularities? Kind of a mundane topic. Had never been done at AST before, actually. But while I've been studying over the 10 years, I knew of 2 different congregations where fraud and theft had happened. And I was really worried about it happening to me going into ministry. I had no idea what to do if something like that were to happen. We had no courses of this in AST. And I think they rely on the church to do that teaching, but the church has never offered that kind of teaching to me, except that if I wanted to go online and maybe do an online learning or to seek that out for myself. So I explored the topic, and I don't want to take too long because honestly I could talk for hours about my grad project, and maybe that's just something we want to hold for a different time. But it's something, one thing I did learn in here is about internal controls. Now, yikes, here I am, new to you, newly learning your stewardship rules and your financial ways, and I'm giving this sermon on Stewardship Sunday. My first Stewardship Sunday sermon, by the way. I wanted to hear in the story of Zacchaeus what motivates, like Jesus did, to encourage Zacchaeus, or to encourage us to carry out God's earthly mission purposefully and effectively. As Zacchaeus found obstacles of his shortness and status to seeing Jesus, what ways do we also find that barriers us from overcoming these obstacles to generosity? Well, when I was thinking about the sermon today, I thought, what do you say to people who have been listening for the last 3 to 4 weeks about the Senate scandals, about misappropriation of funds and organizations on the headlines, of people who live in Nova Scotia where it's also been common practice, well, not common practice, but it's been reported, and people have had to resign their positions because of misappropriate spending. Maybe that's a barrier sometime as to why we may not give as readily as we are able. But I'm glad to say that in talking to some of your financial people, that Grace has a number of conscientious people involved in the process of handling the money in this congregation, and many internal controls. For example, there's always double signing on checks. There are no debit or credit cards used in this congregation. There's a good segregation of duties, and that's your primary internal control. There's always two tellers that count and write their name and sum up the amounts on sheets. Those sheets go directly to your envelope chair only. That envelope chair knows what each person gives, but Stephen and I don't. He produces a revenue summary and then gives it to your bookkeeper. Your bookkeeper doesn't touch the money. She reconciles the bank accounts. The bookkeeper, and with the help of everybody, with Lynn and Connie, and helps to generate good budgets, and they audit each year. It may seem mundane and strange that I'm sharing this in a sermon, but it's important when we're about to ask today on Stewardship Sunday. Stephen will talk to you for a few minutes at the end of the service about our stewardship campaign this year, to know that things happen, but in general, you can trust the fiduciary responsibility of this organization. I hope it helps for some of you to overcome some of the possible barriers to giving. But of course, money is just a small part of this picture. This is a diverse group with a lot of people pitching in and volunteering. One of my colleagues once told me that during Stewardship Sunday, he asks people to commit to one major project and one minor project each year. And if everyone in the pews were to do that, then we would not have volunteer burnout. And that is a way to grow our church. I know many of you do a lot more than just one. But like Zacchaeus, consider what you do and what you give as a gracious response to God's relentless desire for us. Like Jesus, who sought Zacchaeus out in that tree. God seeks us in the world to move into relationships of wholeness. And so, like the extravagance of divine love, which calls us forth to extravagance, if you find yourself staring at the backs of a crowd, look for your tree to climb. If graced with a memorable encounter with God, perhaps your response could be as joyous as Zacchaeus's and lead to a cheerful new commitment to grace and to our united church.